Hello, welcome to a Eurogamer Let's Play with a Twist. I'm playing through a bit of XCOM Enemy Within, the brand new XCOM expansion, and I'm also chatting to Ananda Gupta, the project's lead designer. Ananda, hello, and thanks so much for joining me.
Hey Christian, thanks for having me.
Is it all crazy over there at the moment at Firaxis, or has the chaos died down?
Oh, it's definitely died down some. We've been done for a while. So in terms of activity, we're definitely kind of taking a little bit of breathing room. But of course, everybody's very tense about how well the game will be received and how well our fans will enjoy it. And I have high hopes. We really tried to listen to the fans a lot when we were making this game, making this expansion pack, and so I have high hopes. But that's the source of tension now. Is how just over 2 weeks from release, we're out on the 15th outside the US, and I think everybody's just counting down to the launch party until and see how people like it.
Right. Is Sid pacing his office, looking nervously?
Oh no, Sid is a very even-tempered, mellow kind of guy, and of course he's got his own launch. They just announced the new Ace Patrol game, so he's definitely got his own things to worry about there.
Right. So to get to Enemy Within properly, this is an expansion rather than a new campaign. So that is, it sort of changes the things that you can do in the existing campaign, adding stuff like mech suits and gene splicing technology, for example. Is that a fair way of describing it? Yeah.
We wanted to give. We definitely felt like the XCOM is about an alien invasion, so let's keep it about an alien invasion. But let's add some more stuff. Let's add some more wrinkles, some more systems to interact with, and a lot more tactical options. And we thought that was the right approach. It's the similar approach we've taken to Civ, where no matter what you're doing in Civ, no matter what expansion pack you buy in Civ, it's still about the history of the world from the perspective of the empire you're governing. But there's just more stuff to do and to worry about and to manage.
So perhaps the best way of sort of asking you about the overall impact of the various bits and pieces you've added is, one of the things I've been wondering is you've clearly spent a lot of time playing XCOM, so how has the expansion changed the way that you personally play? Has it opened up new strategies for you, new problems with old strategies? How has it altered your approach to the alien invasion?
Well, I think the meld mechanic is one of the more fundamental and sort of ubiquitous changes to the gameplay that we've introduced, and I think it really has the chance to alter people's play styles, especially depending on what difficulty you're playing on. And I think with meld, because the meld canisters that are on the maps, on certain maps, abduction and UFO maps, that you don't have to recover, but if you want access to the new technologies in the expansion, then you need to start getting it. Since those self-destruct after a fixed amount of time, they will really provide a lure to players to kind of reach for them and to run for them, and I think that's something that's a different play style than was in Enemy Unknown.
That's quite a transformative kind of idea, isn't it? Because normally in XCOM you can kind of hunker down and approach it cautiously, as a good sort of general in an army should. But these meld canisters scattered at the far edges of the maps often, they're almost encouraging you to try and score a touchdown at the same time as you're sort of fighting alien invasion.
Yeah, you're definitely trying to get access to the new goodies, as it were, and yeah, you can continue to play conservatively, but that means you'll advance with those things a little more slowly, and that's up to the player. That's something where we definitely want the player not to feel like a play style that was learned through lots of blood, sweat, and tears in the original is suddenly invalidated. We're not interested in doing that, but we want to introduce a little novelty to it. And I think the covert ops is another thing where, obviously adding 2 new mission types is going to open up a lot of avenues for players to have a different approach to missions. But on the strategy layer, the fact that the player dictates the tempo of the sort of shadow campaign against Exalt, I think the fact that is something that is another really neat element on the strategy layer that is sort of changes how you approach the strategy problem in XCOM.
Can you explain a little bit about Exalt for people who haven't heard about it yet? So about how this all fits into the existing game, because this is entirely new stuff for the Enemy Unknown franchise.
Yes, it is. So Exalt is a paramilitary secret society that is devoted to using alien technology to aggrandize themselves and to position themselves best to wield power, either in the aliens' name or once the aliens have left. They see the alien invasion as an opportunity for them to seize what they've wanted, and so yeah, Exalt is a human opponent that uses sort of covert operations, uses clandestine means to go after XCOM, and XCOM has clandestine means of striking back at Exalt. And what's kind of different about the way Exalt plays as a strategy force is that they place their cells around the world and they carry out operations with these cells, and it's up to the player to decide when and whether to go after these cells, right? Covert ops. So when the aliens attack, you'll see an abduction mission opportunity pop up, and what that will mean is you have a choice between 3 missions, and you can bypass it and skip it, but that's almost nobody ever does that. It's never a good idea, right? If it's at all possible, you definitely want to at least try one of them. You want to try to beat the Exalt mission, the abduction mission. But with Exalt, those missions never happen unless you want them to. You have to decide to send a covert operative in to infiltrate the cell, and then to extract that operative with the intel needed to disrupt the cell.
Right, so
and you time those things. You pick the pace.
So again, it's like another layer of choice in a game which is already full of these interesting choices. I think one of the things which I think is really a crucial choice which people are already thinking about is this idea of whether to go down genetic splicing for your soldiers or kind of mechanical augmentation. Which side, when you first had the playable code with all this stuff in, which side were you most interested to check out yourself?
Well, we did the gene mods first, so just by the vagaries of the schedule of the production schedule, I did the gene. I played gene mods, so I have a weakness for gene mods. But I think I think this is something where players, I think, will be very tempted to jump to conclusions. The mechs are very visually arresting, and they're very dominating on the battlefield, and they're very tough. Although they can't use cover, so they're also easier to hit. And I think players will see some of the very splashy mech weapons as being, this is clearly a no-brainer. But mechs have 3 tiers, and they get much more expensive as you progress in tiers of the mechs. So I think, off the top of my head, I wouldn't want to promise this number, but I think it costs 200 meld to construct a tier 3, a mech 3, right? A mech 3 paladin, and 200 meld is a lot because each canister that you recover gives you 10. That's 20 canisters. That's 10 whole missions of perfect meld recovery to get a tier 3 mech. And so I think players will want to do that. But then you have to looking at it. Okay, well, what happens if I have a fully genetically modified psionic guy, right? Because genetically modified troopers can be psionic and mechs can't. And that soldier starts to look pretty godlike too. and so I think players will have a lot of fun figuring out what the best use of their resources is and how best to suit their playstyles. Personally, I really like to go with one mech and then gene mod the rest of my squad.
Right.
That has its risks because to get that to max out that mech, you're still spending 200 meld, and then how much meld do you have left for some of the more expensive gene mods is a question. And of course, gene mods, if the soldier holding, if the genetically modified soldier dies, that's it, they're gone. So that sort of waffly approach is, I think, valid, but it's also not for the faint of heart.
Right, absolutely. So also another thing that is really noticeable playing through even the early stages of the code we've got at the moment is lots more maps. So can you talk to me a little bit about what it is? What is the secret to making a really great XCOM map? Because some of them you just want to play them over and over again, and I'm just fascinated by how even when you're adding these new elements like such larger guys who can't really use cover, how that affects the way you build these maps out.
Well, I think we were very smart about how we the rules we laid down for map design in the original, and we obviously in EU we didn't always hew to those rules, and that sometimes caused problems. But I think our level designers and our environment team really leveled up, as it were. And they really took all the lessons from EU that they could learn to heart. I think that the key, to answer your question, I think that the key to designing a good XCOM map obviously is cover placement, making sure that the cover is spread properly, that you don't put in too much full cover, because that's simultaneously, excessive full cover in a map can be very sort of stultifying to the gameplay, because it's hard for the aliens to hit you, and it's very hard for you to hit the aliens, and that leads to potential lulls in the combat where it's like, okay, well, everybody's kind of dug in. We just have to keep shooting each other until somebody gets lucky. That's not that's not very good for pacing in a tactical mission. And I think the placement of the meld canisters makes a big difference on those abduction and UFO maps. In terms of making sure that there's variety in where they're placed and the timers are right, and that's something I'm sure we'll hear about from the players, because we put down a lot of meld canisters. So I'm interested to hear how well we pulled that off. And then visually, I think my favorite maps are the ones that are very that echo the 1993 game in terms of the familiarity of the setting, right?
Right.
What are these mutons doing in the bank? Which is right. There's a bank. It's supposed to be a nice place, full of cheerful people and money, and it's got alien death inside.
Is that a post 2008 comment, social commentary going on?
Yeah, right.
One thing before we move on, just one thing I'm really fascinated by, the tactical battle stuff is very immediate. You drop into XCOM, and even if you're a tactical idiot like myself, you have kind of an idea of how you should approach these scenarios. Like which side of cover to stick yourself to is pretty clear. But the strategic base building element has always seemed a little more shrouded in mystery. So if you had one tip for someone who is about to build their first XCOM base, one thing to bear in mind when they're digging out their rooms and kind of sinking elevator shafts and putting satellite uplinks together, what would your tip be for them to watch out for the first time?
I would say I'll give you two tips. I would say look for those steam vents. Those steam vents can really help you out when your base needs to expand. And because power can be a big break on how fast you can expand. And I would also say keep those satellites in mind. You need to, the early game, you should be focusing on trying to accumulate engineers as quickly as possible to get your satellites under control. Now that said, with an enemy within, because we've now given you an alternative to some of those early buildings in the form of the cybernetics lab and the genetics lab, that's actually not as simple as it sounds. That's something. One of the reasons we, aside from just wanting to add cool new rooms to the base, because that's a good thing to do. One of the reasons we wanted to make sure that you had to go through a room to do it was because we wanted the early game to feel fresh in terms of base building.
So can I ask a little bit about yourself? I visited Firaxis earlier this year, and what's fascinating is how everyone has such exciting backgrounds. So Ed Beach, who was currently looking after Civ 5 at the time, worked on the Hubble Space Telescope, which is quite exciting. Yes. And you as well. You've been you came to games through board game design. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had a much less entertaining job before I came into games, and I designed a board game on the side called Twilight Struggle with another guy named Jason Matthews, who works in Washington on very depressing topics, and so the two of us together designed Twilight Struggle, which is a board game about the Cold War, and that was a really fun experience because it originated with he and I belonged to a game club, and we sat around and we were like, we should design a game. And it's like, well, why should we do that? Well, the type of game that we wanted to design, which is called a card-driven war game, where the idea behind a card-driven war game, and there are many examples, and Twilight Struggle is certainly not the first. We owe a lot to previous entries in the type, but in a card-driven war game, the idea is that you have a war game out a conflict, and it has a simple core rule set, and then you use cards to teach the player mechanics, right? You use cards that are special events and powers that to handle sort of obscure situations that in a previous generation of board games might have been handled with just a very long rule book, right? So in the Cold War, you have all these sort of one-off unique events that happen, and in the previous generation of gaming, you would have had a rule book that explained every single one of them, and every time one of them came up, you have to kind of pause the game, look it up. Okay, right. Whereas as a card, it's right there on the card, and you're like, okay, this is how the Salt Talks work, right? This is how the Cuban Missile Crisis works, and we felt that card-driven wargaming was just an incredibly great paradigm-shifting innovation in how sort of conflict simulation board games work. But we felt, so the early entries in that were games like We the People, which is about the American Revolution, For the People, which is about the American Civil War, Paths of Glory, which is about World War I. All of those were just incredibly fantastic games, and they were also very simple and accessible, right? And that was good. That was the whole point of this system. And so Jason and I, back in 2003, decided people are learning the wrong lesson from card-driven war games. They're making card-driven war games that are more and more and more complicated. But we don't want to do that. We want to move in the other direction. We want to make it more and more accessible. So we made a Cold War game that was, and we chose the Cold War because it was a topic that we were both interested in, and we were 90% sure nobody else was doing it. That was all it came down to. And so, the game was happily very successful. It's on Board Game. You can look up its ranking on Board Game Geek, which is sort of the IMDb of games. And yeah, I mean, and I think the lesson, I think a really important lesson that I learned designing a card-driven war game and playing card-driven war games that I bring over to XCOM and to video games is that it's much, especially strategy games, which is of course what we do here at Firaxis. It's a lot better to have the player teach him or herself the game than for you to teach it to the player. So, for example, one of the things that when I first started at Firaxis on XCOM back in July of 2011. One of the problems was that people were having trouble grokking all the combat mechanics because there were so many up front, right? All the combat abilities were tied to weapons, so any assault rifle could suppress, right? So if you had an assault rifle, you could suppress, you could do you had free aiming stuff, you could do various other things, and players were just bewildered by all these things, and moreover, it was very hard to explain to the player what suppression did. That little shot HUD. And so I said, well, we should move these onto soldiers and have soldier classes, and not every soldier can have suppression. And then when it comes time, like later, a couple ranks down, they're deciding between suppression and something else. And because we're giving them this interesting choice of what ability shall I give my soldier, they will carefully study the ability choices. They will teach themselves what suppression does, because we'll tell them, and it's okay, which of these two things do you want? And then the player will understand suppression.
Right.
Much more. And we don't have to front load it into a tutorial. We don't have to rely on the player reading a tooltip while they're trying to figure out, oh my god, there are these aliens around, what am I supposed to do, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, you're sort of incentivizing people actually reading, to actually learning the game.
Exactly. The more of the game learning you can build into player choices instead of sort of things that are core functionality that you are then having to provide in a tutorial, the better, because then players own those. They own those mechanics, right? The players sort of take ownership of those mechanics, and I think that's what card-driven war games did for board gaming in the sort of late 90s and early 2000s, and that is, I think, something that I've taken very close to heart in designing strategy games.
Right.